Hello, friends. Happy Monday. That means another episode of Learn with Lo. I'm so excited to be with you guys today. Obviously had last week off for the Labor Day weekend, and so hopefully everybody had an awesome and relaxing time. I know I did. My husband and I ventured into Breckenridge for a long weekend and got all of the forest medicine, all of the nature medicine, and it was beautiful. So I'm excited to be back in office, and I'm super excited to be with you guys today as we really tackle this fun new idea I had around a live Q&A session where we could really focus on one specific topic, one specific task, and then be able to take real life questions from you guys, things that you guys are reading about, researching, struggling with, feeling symptomatically in terms of your own health and wellness, and be able to answer them in real time. So I submitted a couple question boxes on my stories over the weekend, and if you had an opportunity to drop any of your burning questions in there, I have them all ready to rock and roll today. I think we'll get through most of them. There were a few themes, and I would say like kind of some duplicate themes. So we'll definitely hit on those in depth, especially if they were a common question, right? So I love doing these question boxes, and every time that I do them, I am always so I'm not, well, I wouldn't say surprised, but I'm always very welcoming of all of the questions because I know that there's not a really solid source of information. There's not a really solid platform. A lot of females come to me having been through multiple practitioners before and not really felt like they were listened to, not felt like they were treated as one person and one body. And maybe they've been to a ton of different separate specialists and they felt, kind of piecemealed and band-aided apart. And that's just not how we work at the Lowdown. We really operate in more of an integrative and holistic. And when I say holistic, I mean WHOLE. We are treating the body as a whole. And that means that we understand how every single system and symptom really start to fit together into one individual, right? So you'll hear a lot of that come through today in our kind of first, hopefully, of many live Q&A style Learn with Lo. So I gave us the challenge today to really kind of keep this one to the topic of women's health and hormones, just to be able to kind of narrow us down, keep us on task, and that way we didn't feel like we were jumping around too much. And I totally anticipate doing more of these Q&As because I think we got a great response, and I know that people have even more questions out there, whether that's in regards to things like, gut health or adrenals and thyroid management and nervous system regulation, supplements. I mean, the world is an endless oyster for us, right? And we'll dig in. So just for today, I feel like I said, I get like the richest blessing to be able to work with so many individuals on their health and wellness journey, males and females alike, their successes, their failures, their struggles, disappointments, also their biggest kind of fears and vulnerabilities. And so you'll hear a lot of that come into play too in today's questions and answers. But today is for the ladies out there. We are going to really be able to have a safe space here to dig into all things women's health and hormones. And it will take us down a bunch of different rabbit holes. So I'm just going to kick us off with a little bit more of a question that was submitted around what I would call a case study, and giving more details around her and what she was struggling with, because it's going to give us a great jumping off point into multiple different conversations, right? So this was a little bit of a long one that was even messaged to me like outside of the question boxes, and I felt like it's a good jumping off point. So let's just dive right in, right? So this gal writes in and she says, hello, she's like, I've come to find out what a heavy period actually is. She's like, since I was 17, she's now 35 years old with one child. Since I was 17, I've been to 5 different OBGYNs for my heavy bleeding, only to tell me that some women are just like that over and over again. Well, here I am, embarrassingly having to wear ultra tampons with ultra pads and worry if I can't get somewhere in time to change them almost every hour on the hour for the first couple days of my period. I literally plan my life around my cycle because of how many times I've bled through clothes or how many times it's been too close to call. I am using an IUD with no improvements because hormonal options make me feel terrible and I don't want that toxic shit in my body. Her words, not mine. Is this something that is really normal and something I have to put up with, or is there something that my doctor isn't aware of that could be contributing? So, big old case study, which is not uncommon that I hear over and over again of women not even really have anything to compare it to, right? We grow up and we kind of only experience like our menstrual cycle, and we don't really know what normal sometimes is unless we're have other females in our life that we can kind of bounce that off of each other, right? So first and foremost, I just want to kind of lay out the scene here of how many women kind of struggle with this heavy bleeding. Approximately 30% of women that struggle with this heavy bleeding account for almost 2/3 of the hysterectomies per year. So 30% of women struggle with heavy bleeding. They may not even know it because they don't have any sort of reference range of what is heavy bleeding, which we'll talk about in a second, of what kind of defines that, so you can determine whether you're in this category or not. But like I said, up to 30% of women are affected, and it accounts for probably the most common reason why a woman might then seek out a future hysterectomy, right? So this can be a severe health problem that can really disrupt not only the woman's quality of life, and it really shouldn't be taken lightly, because then we can have a cascade of other downstream reactions when we're having this really heavy menstrual cycle, right? So while heavy menstrual bleeding may be an issue that a lot of women deal with, it's certainly not something that you have to live with. So let's do a little bit of definition first, and then we'll kind of talk about what I think about as a practitioner and my treatment thoughts and plans around someone struggling with heavy bleeding. So what is considered heavy bleeding to begin with? So a menstrual cycle that lasts longer than 7 days, considered heavy bleeding. Menstrual cycle that soaks through one or more tampons or pads every hour on the hour for several hours in a row. So the number that they put to it is losing more than 80 milliliters of blood during your period. That's really hard to measure and manage. A regular sized tampon, for reference, holds anywhere from about 5 to 10 milliliters. So that's like more than 8 completely soaked regular sized tampons over the course of an entire menstrual cycle would be considered heavy bleeding, right? So you're like, oh man, like I use ultra tampons multiple times for 3 to 4 days in a row. It's like you're going to probably constitute under that heavy bleeding category then. Also, any menstrual flow that comes with blood clots, larger than like the size of a dime, or definitely the size of a quarter, if we're seeing a lot of clotting in there as well too. So those are some of the things that you kind of think of when it comes to like what constitutes a heavy menstrual cycle. But when we think about the conventional workup for something like this, like a woman goes into the OB, right? She's got issues with her menstrual cycle that she wants to discuss. What's the conventional workup, right? So we have to rule out some of the big stuff first. So we may rule out things like uterine dysfunction, whether it's fibroids or polyps, endometriosis, or more serious things like cervical or uterine cancers, right? We absolutely have to do some of the more big picture workup. Also, we might look at things like any hormonal dysfunctions, like an imbalance in progesterone to estrogen, not ovulating consistently, thyroid disorders. All of those types of things can also fall under the kind of general workup, right? The unfortunate part is, in more of a conventional setting, the fixes for these types of things, you end up getting kind of 2 routes. You either get offered birth control or some sort of like surgical procedure, whether it's an ablation or hysterectomy, right? So kind of 2 more extreme situations where it's like, oh, we can just like shut this off entirely by either like taking your reproductive organs out or shutting off the communication between your brain and your reproductive organs and just flatlining your hormones. Both of those things sometimes temporarily fix the issue, but we have to realize that we didn't address the root cause, so that root cause is still boiling behind the scenes, right? This will be a common theme for us to talk about today. So when I think about heavy menstrual cycles, heavy painful periods and things like that, ruling out, like I said, some of those more serious type of things, I start to think about what are the real root causes here, right? Number one, chronic stress, right? Chronic stress, we know absolutely is going to be at the root cause of a lot of these things, only because it's not like, oh, stress impacts my menstrual cycles. We've kind of seen that, yes, but really at the crux of it, what's happening is the interaction between our body's production of cortisol and the body's production of progesterone. The body has to kind of choose in that situation. So under chronic stress, high cortisol is always going to win. So in those women, we see progesterone drop. When we see progesterone drop, now we have a very imbalanced ratio relationship between high estrogen, low progesterone. That is a key indicator for heavy menstrual cycles, when we have a high or an inappropriately high estrogen to progesterone ratio. We don't have enough progesterone to offset the amount of estrogen in the system. That can happen because of chronic stress, right? So that's in a situation where, like I said, we're digging for the root cause, right? What is the cause of the low progesterone? Likely something to do with chronic stress. The stress could also have something to do with other things like blood sugar dysregulation, specifically blood sugar lows. That can be a really big source of chronic cortisol. Other things that we kind of see outside of like an adrenal picture to this, we may also be having the gut involved here. So sometimes I see gallbladder and bile issues. We talked about this on one of our previous Learn with Low episodes. If you didn't catch that one, you can go back a few episodes and watch our liver gallbladder one, because that one we talked a lot about how the gallbladder and bile are responsible for balancing things like estrogen and our estrogen dominance. So sometimes we see that in women as well too, struggling with heavy cycles. They have gallbladder bile issues. If we have heavy cycles, the number one thing we really want to look at is the liver, right? The liver is our major detoxification organ. It is responsible for detoxing excess estrogen. And if it's not doing that, then we have to kind of ask why, right? Sometimes there can be some gut dysbiosis here, whether they're yeast overgrowths or fungal overgrowths, bacterial overgrowths. There could be some endocrine disruptors in the mix here that are bogging down the liver. We could have some overall just toxicity issues. So I highly, highly recommend that if you are someone that feels very similar to this female in this camp, of recognizing that she actually deals with high menstrual bleeding or heavy bleeding, we don't necessarily want to just stop at ruling out the big stuff, right? Definitely get your workup, rule out the big stuff. But if all of those things are negative and we're still having those types of things, we have to start to dig deeper, right? Even if we do have some fibroids that are found, it's like, okay, well, what caused the fibroids to begin with? An estrogen dominant situation. What caused the estrogen dominant situation? It's like, well, it could be adrenal patterns and stress. It could be gut dysbiosis and liver detoxification issues. It's always peeling back the next layer. There's so many Band-Aid solutions available out there, whether it's supplements and medications and ablation and hysterectomy. I'm like, that's all well and good. We have to have some things like that, but it doesn't mean that the disease pattern is gone, right? We're still going to have estrogen dominance show up in other aspects of the body, even if we take out the hysterectomy, or we go through a hysterectomy situation. So I just don't ever want people to think like, oh, well, that's it, I fixed the problem. It's like, no, we just manage the symptoms, but the overall root cause is still existing behind the scenes. So you're going to hear this a lot today, right? When I start to think about hormones and why hormones may be going funky or rocky on us, if we are getting some mismatches in that estrogen progesterone picture, it's not your hormones, right? What is at the root of the hormones is going to be something deeper. And that's where, like I said, from a conventional medicine standpoint, some women just get lost in the sauce because they aren't offered these solutions at the root of the problem, right? So for, like I said, my gal that wrote in and shared with us her great story about just understanding what her menstrual cycle actually means and that she is experiencing a lot of heavy bleeding, know that women are not just like that. I know that you've been told that multiple times by multiple practitioners. It's not necessarily true. And there's likely, like I said, some adrenal components I would definitely dive into with you, as well as some gut and some liver dysfunction that I definitely would look into as well too. So great candidate for my Renew Your Gut program in that situation for sure. Which leads us and segues to our next question. I got multiple different questions around my treatment thoughts and strategies for endometriosis patients. So this person wrote in and said, what do you recommend for endometriosis patients? I also had another question very specifically around what do you recommend for endometriosis patients, specifically female who is very active, she's thin, she's otherwise very healthy. What do you kind of think of when you think of endometriosis in these individuals? So sometimes, like I said, endometriosis is part of the cause of heavy bleeding, right? That's why it's such a segue. Some women can have heavy bleeding without having endometriosis. So those two things can exist in separation, right? But for those women that have been diagnosed with endometriosis, let's just do a high level overview for people that aren't aware. What is it? what are the signs and symptoms, and what are more of a root cause approach treatment strategy that I think about when it comes to thinking about this endometriosis progression and diagnosis. So endometriosis is really another common one where women are mistreated and misevaluated from a conventional medicine standpoint. 1 in 10, that's a lot. 1 in 10 women are impacted with endometriosis. It is characterized by the endometrial lining that should be inside the uterus, the lining that sheds every month and produces a bleed. The endometrial lining actually starts to grow outside the uterus, and it grows on other tissues. So it can grow in the pelvic floor, it can grow on ovaries, it can even grow on the intestines and the digestive organs as well too. So a lot of times we see intense pain, a lot of cramping, long or heavy bleeding, spotting, like even ovulatory spotting or spotting before or after the period, and as well as infertility. So the amount of like absolutely miserable postmenopausal women that have had a history of endometriosis and they dealt with it through a hysterectomy or surgical removal, they are, like I said, still dealing with issues even into menopause, right? And I only share that with you is because a lot of times, again, from a conventional standpoint, we treat hormones as this like separate entity of a female body, right? And so we think, oh, okay, you're having endometriosis symptoms, this is really impacting your quality of life. We'll just do a full hysterectomy and it'll be all gone. And it's like, but we still see even into postmenopause, even when women aren't ovulating anymore, even if you go through a whole surgical hysterectomy procedure, they're still dealing with symptoms of endometriosis. So we know that this is not just a hormonal issue, right? This is a total body, widespread. The immune system is involved. There's even a lot of research out there that is talking about endometriosis being part of the autoimmune spectrum, right? So it's really astounding to me to think that like, oh yeah, hysterectomy, like we'll just take it out and it'll be all better. It's like, no, we didn't fix the root cause of the problem, which is why is the endometrial lining growing outside of the uterus in the first place, right? Versus just coming in with repeated Band-Aid solutions and ignoring all of the other symptoms that female might be experiencing. So unlike more of a conventional medicine standpoint, I see and treat endometriosis as a whole body immune and inflammatory dysfunction is really what we're seeing. So there's quite a bit of research, like I said, to support that endometriosis actually has autoimmune characteristics, meaning that endometriosis is going to be a combination of hormonal dysregulation, like we usually see high estrogen to progesterone ratio. We also tend to see a lot of gut involvement here. Gut dysbiosis, leaky gut, intestinal permeability, food sensitivities, and now all of a sudden, because of all of that gut dysfunction, the immune system is on overdrive, right? So it's this total body, hormones are involved, the gut's involved, dysbiosis is involved, and because of that, now the immune system's involved. We got like a whole systems on board here, right? So because of that, if we aren't considering that it is a total body treatment or a total body diagnosis, then we're going to kind of miss our treatment options for it too. So we're not going to be very successful if we just treat it as a hormonal imbalance, which is what happens when we kind of treat it with like birth control or hysterectomy, ablation. Like that's our thought process of just treating the hormonal side of it, right? Which can be helpful Band-Aid. I'm not saying, like I said, I'm against those things. I just don't want women to be surprised when it's not the end all be all, and women to be surprised or shocked if things start to grow back, like endometrial lining starts to grow back and they need future surgeries. Or I don't want women to, like I said, feel frustrated because they are continuing to have symptoms even post some of those procedures, because it's not uncommon because we didn't get it at the root cause if we just treat it as a hormonal dysfunction. So instead, I would start to think bigger picture. We're going to start to think more of a root cause approach when it comes to endometriosis. Number one, we definitely have to be addressing nutrient deficiencies, right? The immune system is involved here, right? So big things that I'm thinking about are your fat soluble vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. Those are really big. What helps us absorb a lot of those fat soluble vitamins is proper gallbladder function, proper bile production, right? As well as good, healthy fats in the diet. Things like your avocados, things like your nuts and your seeds, right? Things like olive oils and things that we get from those types of foods as well too. We also, in that same situation of addressing nutrient deficiencies from a diet standpoint, we also want to make sure that we're addressing blood sugar. This is a population of individuals where inflammation is running rampant. If we can control any controllable source of inflammation, we're going to want to do it. So I do think from a endometriosis standpoint, those individuals really benefit from a blood sugar stabilizing diet, which usually involves helping increase their natural whole food intake of fiber, right? So when we think fiber, we think plants, right? Produce, fruits, like those individuals really do well on more fiber. It's going to help them digest and detox estrogen as well too. So we get that imbalance of estrogen to progesterone. That extra fiber really helps the body detox estrogen too. Speaking of fiber and detoxification, we also think about liver pathways and liver detoxification, right? It all goes through the liver in order for us to like see estrogen, produce estrogen, but then we need to get it out. And that's through pooping it out. We poop out our estrogen on a daily basis. So the fiber really helps bind excess estrogen. It helps us excrete excess estrogen and make sure that we're maintaining healthy dietary patterns in that regard. Other things that we think about, especially from a liver perspective, is overall toxicity burden. So there's, again, a large body of research that connects endometriosis with toxin burden on the female body. Now, this can come from multiple different sources. I've had patients with endometriosis that have mold burdens. I have patients with endometriosis that have heavy metal burdens. I have patients with endometriosis that have had more on the endocrine disruptors, those things that are like your fragrances, plastics, right? Those types of things that are really burdening their liver detox pathways as well too. So these individuals really benefit from more of a detoxification protocol that I can walk them through safely so that these things can go from a fat soluble state, water soluble state, and again, pee, poop, and sweat them out of the body, right? So opening up and supporting a lot of the detoxification is huge in this population. So we definitely want to think about addressing any of those potential detoxification pathways. Usually I use things like GI map test or like a functional stool testing. We can use urinary analysis to identify whether there's any, like I said, mold, heavy metals, fragrances, plastics, things like that as well too, so that we can safely help them through a detoxification protocol. So again, this isn't one of those pictures from an endometriosis standpoint. Like we can't just treat it as a hormonal issue. That's a band-aid solution at best, and it probably won't get us very far. We have to back up and ask like, what is making the hormones imbalanced in the first place? And let's treat that. So endometriosis tends to be even a bigger showing of that estrogen, that inability to detox estrogen properly, and also a big burden on gut and immune system dysfunction. So anybody struggling with endometriosis, I essentially immediately would start to think about your gut. I would immediately start to think about supporting your drainage and your detox pathways for sure. So these, again, can't recommend enough more of, like I said, the functional GI map testing, OAT testing, again, all the things that I kind of do within that Renew Your Gut Health program and container for women and females, right? So if you're not noticing a theme yet, you're probably picking up on a theme, right? It's like, oh, a lot of these women's health and hormones questions, we have so many options, whether it's supplements or extreme surgical interventions or hormonal birth control. It's like we have so many different Band-Aid fixes out there that will temporarily make the symptoms go away, but they're not, like I said, a long-term solution. I'm always thinking about a long-term solution so that an individual could live life off of hormonal birth control if they want to and not have these crazy symptoms, or be able to keep all of their reproductive organs intact all the way through menopause to make that situation and that transition so much more smooth than a full hysterectomy picture might be, right? So lots of different things where we're really thinking like, what's going on in the adrenals, what's going on in the gut, what's going on in the liver, what's going on with this toxin burden picture, right? Things that you're not going to hear in a conventional medicine practitioner's office. You're just not, because that's not the tools that they have available, right? So speaking of which, with some of those tools that they have available, our next question came in around birth control. And the question was, how does birth control affect overall health, specifically the difference between an IUD or a pill? I'm just going to preface this question by saying a lot of people assume that I'm like anti-pharma and anti-birth control. I'm really not, right? I always just like individuals to understand pros and cons. I also am very, very passionate and feel like every woman should feel educated and every woman should feel empowered with that education to be able to know how to make the right decision for herself. What irks me to my core is when women are handed something like birth control and sold a lie, quite frankly, that it's going to fix their hormonal imbalance issues. It doesn't fix anything. It just masks it. So there's still issues going on behind the scenes. So while maybe your menstrual cycles are no longer heavy, you probably still struggle with acne. You might still struggle with migraines. You might still struggle with weight gain. You probably still struggle with gut issues. You probably still struggle with brain fog, or you might struggle with joint pain, or you might struggle. Do you see a theme? It's like, oh, cool, we took care of one symptom, but it's evident that like the inflammation and the underlying root cause still exists because I still have all of these other symptoms. It's like, yes, I know. And then, like I said, especially when women are given birth control from a pretty young age and told like, oh, this will fix your hormonal imbalances, then in later years when they try to get off of it because maybe they're interested in starting a family, having kids, they come off of it and whoosh, all of a sudden all of those same hormonal issues that they got on birth control to begin with, they come raging back and they're like, wait, what the heck? And now they're struggling to get pregnant, and maybe now they're in the whole IVF system. I'm like, do you see the pattern? It's like, oh, this is great. We'll just put girls on birth control really young. Then decades later, when they want to get off of it and try to conceive naturally and all of their symptoms come back, they either get back on birth control and then we just peddle them into IVF. I'm like, follow the money here, people, right? Versus me, I'm like, okay, let's ask the question of why. Like, why is she struggling with menstrual cycle issues at a young age to begin with? Are there things that we can do to intercept it now and change the course of action so that she doesn't have to be on long-term birth control? Or at least can we be on some of these hormonal birth control options while we're working on the root cause, right? So that you actually have an exit strategy in your back pocket should you want it in the future and not have all of these raging symptoms come back. So long story short, I am not anti-pharma. I am not anti-birth control. I just want women to feel educated and empowered and know the truth so that they can make that educated decision for themselves of like, maybe you decide you're like, yeah, you know what, like right now, like my heavy cycles or my painful cycles, they're just too much to handle and I need the hormonal birth control on board, but I'm smart and I know that that's not really fixing anything. So I'm going to put this on board, but I'm also going to do the work to investigate why. I'm going to do the work around like what's going on with the adrenals, blood sugar. Is there some gut stuff going on? Do I have some liver or drainage or detox issues going on? We can work on those things behind the scenes so that you actually have an exit strategy in the future should you want it, right? So that's what I'm really passionate about, is just making sure that people recognize pros, cons, what's right for them, what's not right for them. So not anti anything, but I do think, like I said, it's something that a lot of women aren't really taught what it's actually doing. So birth control, or like I said, ablation, hysterectomy, pick one, right? It doesn't matter. It's really just our conventional solution to being able to kind of like mask the symptoms in the meantime, or improve, like immediately improve a female's quality of life, which is absolutely necessary. But don't get me wrong, I'm all for, like I said, having those tools for women to like feel better yesterday. Yes, but I'm not really here for women not getting the real help that they deserve for underlying conditions, right? And not all hormonal options are right for every female, right? Which means there's maybe like some broader dysfunction happening on all levels, not just the hormones. So know that, like I said, the issues are still progressing behind the scenes, even if we have birth control on board. So don't let that fool you. But there are many different types of hormonal birth control, different mechanisms of action across the board. So they have slightly different effects on our overall health, right? Which is what the original question was asking. So the things that I always want to make sure women understand is that birth control uses synthetic hormones, not bioidentical hormones. So you're not getting, like, don't let anyone tell you like, oh, here, you'll just get put on birth control and you can just use this all the way through menopause because it's the same hormones that you would get anyway in a menopausal situation. That is not true. Absolutely not true. Synthetic hormones are not the same as bioidentical hormones. They operate very differently in the body and therefore have very different downstream actions on our overall health, right? So know that difference between synthetic hormones. Also, like these synthetic hormones, they're going to actually interrupt and literally shut off the natural communication between the brain and the ovary. So instead of these like natural fluctuations of progesterone and estrogen that a female will feel during her unabated menstrual cycle, with those synthetic hormones, you essentially just flatline them. Right? So we just become like meh, like net low. So that way you're not feeling the symptoms of those imbalanced hormone fluctuations. It's like, let's just shut them off then, right? Instead of figuring out like how to harmonize them and how to restore their balance, we're thinking, let's just shut them off, right? So essentially shuts off ovulation. You're not going to get any progesterone. You're not going to get any hormones, right? So it's just a low hormone state, right? Again, not good, not bad, just educating what it is, right? So common side effects of hormonal birth control, things that you might see, mood swings for sure. I mean, we are talking about no progesterone here, and progesterone is nature's Xanax. So I tend to see more of the mood swings, irritability, depression, anxiety. Some women also experience the side effects of weight gain because progestin, which is the synthetic progesterone, sometimes can act like an androgen, like testosterone. So it can increase appetite. It can lead to more fluid retention, water retention. The synthetic estrogen in birth control can sometimes cause and lead to insulin resistance. So that can kind of struggle with weight distribution as well too. We also sometimes see like low bone mineral density. Again, estrogen, very much supportive of bone growth. So sometimes, like I said, women that use hormonal birth control through a lot of their 20s, 30s, 40s, and then they hit menopause, and like they could be 20, 30 years where their body has never cycled naturally, and then they're hitting like a low hormone state like menopause, and then they start to recognize and get diagnosed with osteoporosis, osteopenia. I'm like, well, yeah, because for the last 30 years, your body hasn't seen like any natural hormones. So I do see, like I said, bone deterioration can be part of that. Migraines, risk of blood clots, strokes, increased risk of certain types of cancers. Sometimes, like I said, even with the thought process, sometimes people are sold like, oh, we're going to put you on birth control because it's going to preserve your eggs or preserve your ovarian reserve is what we call it. That's not true. So don't let anybody, like I said, fool you. Otherwise, some women do struggle with fertility coming off of hormonal birth control because their body hasn't had those natural communication cues between the brain and the ovaries as well too. And then the biggest side effect that we see is nutrient deficiencies. So vitamin A, again, we talked about that with endometriosis and some of the fat soluble vitamins. So it does deplete vitamin A, it does deplete a lot of the B vitamins, depletes vitamin C, hello adrenals, magnesium, copper, iron. So we see a lot of those depletions as well too. So zero judgment on decision either way. Like I said, I am not pro or anti birth control. I just want women to understand like all of the pros and the cons, what it's doing versus what it's not doing. And that way you're not like, I don't know, like lied to, I think that's shady. It's like, let's just call a spade and let's just educate about it, because then I think more women can really know what's right for them. So even if you're on hormonal birth control of any kind, whether it's an IUD or a pill or Depo-Provera or any type of, I would absolutely make sure that we are emphasizing a nutrient dense diet first and foremost, full of color, full of protein and produce for sure. I would also consider probably adding some strategic supplementation here as well. A good methylated B, I think, would be complex. Supplement, I think, would be very helpful. We're also going to want to try to replete minerals. So there are some good, honestly, even just like a good, not a crappy one, but like a good prenatal, which is kind of ironic. We would be taking a prenatal supplement while we're on birth control. Even if your goal is not around fertility, it can just fill in some of the nutrient gaps that the pill depletes as well too. So fun fact there, right? Kind of wrapping up a little bit. We have a few more questions, but I'll try to kind of loop them together. One of the questions I loved was around cycle syncing, right? So we've really talked about at this point in time some of the considerations to take when things go wrong, right? Oh my gosh, I have heavy cycles. What should I be thinking about? Oh my gosh, I have heavy painful periods. I have irregular cycles. I have fertility concerns because I'm not ovulating. I've been diagnosed with PCOS, endometriosis. Like when things start to go wrong or things start to go haywire, that's where I started to talk about we need to look outside the hormones. What is telling the hormones to act the way that they are? Is something going on with the adrenals and blood sugar side? Is something going on with gut, liver detoxification side of things? Those are the two areas that I would really start to dive into, right? So that means that like adrenal side, we need to think about food forward. We need to think about blood sugar. We need to think about nutrient density. We need to think about stress, circadian rhythm, gut, liver dysfunction. We need to think about like toxicity concerns. We need to be thinking about gut microbiome. We need to be thinking about liver function, right? So it's like, oh my gosh, you haven't even mentioned my hormones. I'm like, no, exactly. Because the hormones are doing what they're doing for a reason. We're going to dig into what is that reason. I'm not going to just band-aid the hormones. Like, what are we doing here, right? Not really getting us anywhere. So that's, like I said, when things kind of go haywire. If you're someone that, like I said, is starting to think a little bit more proactively, I also like to teach a lot around cycle syncing, a lot around cycle tracking. Again, I'm always amazed at how many 40, 45-year-old women come to me and they're like, I've never tracked my cycle a day in my life. And I'm like, you're going to learn today because there's so much value in it. Regardless of if you have fertility concerns or not. I don't care if you want to prevent pregnancy, promote pregnancy, or don't really care either way, you should be tracking your cycle as a female. And I think this is something we should be learning a lot younger as females too. Definitely one of my like passion points. So just to kind of wrap us up, let's talk about cycle tracking just a little bit. So should I be tracking my cycle? What methods do I recommend? What benefits are there, if any, of knowing when or knowing your cycle aside from just like when is my bleed supposed to start, right? So even if your cycles are relatively consistent, like there's some real power here. So short answer, should I be tracking my cycle? Hell yes, you should be tracking your cycle. Firm believer that women of reproductive age should absolutely be tracking their cycle. Not only is this helpful for knowing like when you might start your cycle so it doesn't catch you by surprise. I know tracking my cycle, I can tell usually within about 12 to 24 hours of when I'm going to start my cycle. So it's never a surprise. It doesn't shock me. I'm like, yep, I expected you today, right? Because I'm tracking it more so than just like a calendar system, right? That's one way that we can track it. But I mean, there's so many things that we can really use as part of our cycle, which I'll allude to here in a second. So first off, what are some methods for tracking your cycle? If nothing else, if you have an iPhone, open up your Apple Health app and go under your cycle tracking section and start tracking your cycles on their calendar system. If nothing else, use your Apple Health app to log it as a calendar tracking. Is it, like I said, the most sophisticated of measurements? Can we do more in more detail? Yes. Is a calendar system really, really helpful? 100% it is. So use the cycle tracking feature on your Apple Health app at the very least. It will record your cycle length, your bleed window, predicted start date. You can also add in any symptoms in there like abdominal cramping, breast tenderness, acne, bloating, appetite changes, stuff like that. So it's a great tracker. And you'll get some really early warning signs if something is kind of off, right? If you are doing that already and you want like a little bit more, or you want to kind of start to actually sync your life around your cycle, which is what I teach with women in how to work with your cycle versus against it. I mean, nutrition, exercise, work productivity, meetings, school. There's so many things where our body is kind of different at different times of the month. And if you can recognize those things, you can make your life a hell of a lot easier versus harder trying to do certain tasks during certain times of your cycle. So more advanced would be getting a basal body temperature tracking method. Contrary to popular belief, the bleed isn't even the cool part of the cycle. Ovulation, which happens mid-cycle, that is the bread and butter. That's the crescendo of the actual cycle, right? So when you track basal body temperature, you're not just on a calendar system, you're just tracking your bleed because that's all we can see, right? But if you're tracking basal body temperature, now you get to actually see, when do I ovulate? That's when things start to really pick up and get fun, right? So tracking basal body temperature, you'll clearly be able to see if and when you ovulate, which transitions us from the follicular phase to the luteal phase. That's where the magic happens, right? There are devices, there's one called Temp Drop. It's like an armband, Oura Ring, fan favorite. If you've been around, you know I'm a big fan of Oura Ring, because it really helps you track all of this easily. I personally would never mess with the whole thermometer system. That's just me. I know myself. I ain't doing that. So I like some of those devices that really help me do it easier. So the main benefit here, like I said, is learning how to work with your hormones, not against it. So then you'll start to be able to see, okay, I know that I'm in my follicular phase. That follicular phase is when your body's more stress resilient. We have more stable appetite. Our blood sugar's more stable. So it's like, this is the time to do more high intensity workouts. This is the time to go for that PR. This is the time to play around with fasting windows. If you're gonna get testy, test stuff here in the follicular phase. We tend to be a lot more stress resilient. The second you ovulate and you start to see those basal body temperatures rise, now you're in the luteal phase. Luteal phase, we're less stress resilient. We tend to be more hungry. We tend to have more cravings. We're less recovered. We have poor sleep. We're probably a little bit more anxious, right? And this is the time to dial back the intensity, not the frequency. You're not broken. You can still move your body every day, but dial back the intensity, right? Lean into yoga, lean into stretching, lean into walking over circuits or Pilates over CrossFit, right? Otherwise, I tell you right now, you're going to try to work harder during that luteal phase and you're going to end up feeling more puffy, more fluffy, more inflamed. And then you're going to spend the whole next follicular phase trying to undo the puffiness and the fluffiness of that luteal phase. Don't do it, ladies. Oh my gosh, talk about feeling literally crazy. So this is the time during that luteal phase, actually, dare I say, eat more, not eat less. Specifically, eat more fiber, not more sugar. No fasting during this luteal phase. Do not do it, right? So this is also, that luteal phase is also the time where we want to bring in more liver love, right? More detoxification practices to help our body detox those extra hormones that we're producing during that luteal phase, right? So this right here, cycle syncing, cycle tracking, knowing when your body's transitioning from the follicular phase to the luteal phase, knowing how to change your nutrition, your exercise for it. Oh my gosh, does it make body composition easier, mood stabilization, sleep, gut health, skin health? All of the things that a lot of us women are really struggling with. It's what if we just learned how to work with our hormones, not against it? What if we just learned what is at the root of why our hormones are imbalanced in the first place and really start to get those back in alignment versus just trying to cover them up with different Band-Aid strategies, right? That's what I'm here for. So to me, this is a really missed and overlooked opportunity, is just knowing how to track our body, knowing how to pay attention to those things. And also, I think there's a huge disservice for women going into a conventional medicine practitioner and not having any conversations about her adrenals or her blood sugar or her gut microbiome or her liver detoxification or toxin burden on her body or testing for any of those things. I'm if a female has hormonal imbalance issues, that is do not pass go, do not collect $200. That is where we're starting. And they're well, are we going to test my hormones? I'm yeah, we already know your hormones are off. I'm trying to figure out why your hormones are off, right? That's the bread and butter, right? Versus just trying to cover it up with different strategies. So I digress. Like I said, we answered lots of questions here. We talked about some of the common myths that women don't know about their body, some of the common things that we may not know about, some different Band-Aid solutions. We talked about certain foods and certain nutrients that are really good for the female body. We talked about certain diagnoses like endometriosis and heavy painful cycles and what to think about there. So is this all encompassing? Hell no. Like there's so many different directions we can go, but these were, like I said, some of your guys' burning questions. And I hope that this was, like I said, helpful for you guys to start to think a little bit outside the box. If, like I said, you feel like you're one of these individuals and you're struggling where to go next, I absolutely think you would be an ideal candidate for my Renew Your Gut Health program. You can jump into the Renew Your Gut Health program at any point in time. That is a program that I've designed for you to be able to get access to gut testing, to work together one-on-one, to get customized protocols, to really understand why your body is operating the way that it is, and start to look at things from more of a root cause perspective. So the Renew Your Gut program is up and open for registration. You can click the link in my bio to find that and register today, and we can get our gut journey started. So hopefully this was helpful. Think outside the box when it comes to female health and hormones, and I'm excited to do more of these Q&A boxes with you guys soon. So happy Monday.